In order to avoid any disturbances during the conference, I'd like to ask you to put your mobile phones on mute, please. Thank you. Minglaba and good evening, everybody. And ladies and gentlemen, my name is Cherry Gigi Thatun, and I'm your moderator for this session. On behalf of MmTESOL and the organizing committee, it is my pleasure to welcome you all here to the MmTESOL Virtual Conference 2020, held in Yangon virtually. And we know that the organizing committee has put in so much effort and passion in organizing this conference. And as stated in the program agenda, we have some excellent speakers today. So we get right on with it and start with the opening. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce our all-time favorite speaker for the opening remarks, Mr. Roy Cross. Mr. Roy Cross is a principal consultant, English for Education Systems at the British Council. He comes with a rare combination of energy and enthusiasm with more than 30 years of international experience. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Roy Cross. So I pass the floor to Mr. Roy Cross now.
Thank you, Jerry. And embarrassingly, you've clearly read my LinkedIn profile, which I need to update to say I'm older. Almost as much enthusiasm and experience. Yeah. It's a great honor to be asked to open this MmTESOL conference, the first virtual conference. And if I lift up my head a bit, you can tell what a great honor it is, because this is the first tie I have worn since March. So there you go. I made my first visit to Yangon, to Myanmar. It was either 1999 or 2000. And a group of teachers came together and we very quietly founded the LTEX network in a big hotel in the center of the city. We did it quietly because I think it wasn't really allowed, although we had the support of people from the Ministry of Education. And I think I might have read at that event the poem by Philip Larkin, The Importance of Elsewhere, that I would like to share with you today. I don't know whether anyone here today virtually, was there 20 or 21 years ago. I guess it's possible. But this is a poem that has always been important to me. I'll explain why. I'll read it to you twice, and I'll pause between the readings and explain a little bit about why I think this poem by Philip Larkin is important. What I'd like to do now, and I hope I can, is to share my screen. I think I've been given permission. Let me just see if I can do that. And it's just, I think, waking up. Can people read that? Is that okay? Just yes. Put your thumbs up if you can.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Good. So I'll read it twice. This is the first time. And I'll explain in the middle, not before. The importance of elsewhere. Lonely in Ireland, since it was not home, strangeness made sense. The salt rebuff of speech, insisting so on difference, made me welcome. Once that was recognized, we were in touch. Their drafty streets end on to hills, the faint archaic smell of dockland like a stable, the herring hawker's cry, dwindling, went to prove me separate not unworkable. Living in England has no such excuse. These are my customs and establishments. It would be much more serious to refuse. Here, no elsewhere underwrites my existence. Larkin wrote this poem when, for the very first time, he had left, if you like, his comfort zone. He was very much a Middle Englander. Leicester and Coventry were his sort of home territory. He was a librarian, a university librarian. And early in his career, he was offered a job at Queen's University in Belfast, in Northern Ireland. And this is the poem that experience provoked. He found it strange. He was lonely to start with. But eventually he began to understand that Belfast gave him a point of comparison. It was something that he could compare. The only place he'd known up till then, Coventry and Leicester, so that there were possibilities of looking at how people did things differently. He says, strangeness made sense. I'll read this once more. The importance of elsewhere. Lonely in Ireland, since it was not home, strangeness made sense. The salt rebuff of speech, insisting so on difference, made me welcome. Once that was recognized, we were in touch. Their draughty streets end on to hills, the faint archaic smell of dockland like a stable. The herring hawker's cry, dwindling, went to prove me separate, not unworkable. Living in England has no such excuse. These are my customs and establishments. It would be much more serious to refuse. Here, no elsewhere underwrites my existence. And I can share that poem if people would like to have it afterwards. Yeah, I'll just stop sharing it for now. Why is that an important poem to me? Why has it been an important poem for more than 20 years? Teaching at its best, at its very best, is a collaborative activity. It's one where teachers support each other, not uncritically, but honestly and with goodwill. Teaching at its worst is a lonely, competitive activity. And I still remember from my very, very first teaching job at a language school here in Cambridge, good heavens, 40 years ago. It's a long time. I, over the weekend, had been reading the Sunday Times. That was my weekend newspaper of choice. And they had a feature in those days with a picture, a photograph of a well-known person called A Life in the Day. Not a day in the life, but a life in the day. And it explained a bit about that person and their occupation and why they were of interest. And I was a young teacher, and I thought, good heavens, this makes a good lesson. So I took the magazine into the staff room on the Monday morning to make photocopies for my class. And as I was doing so, a colleague came in and said, oh, good heavens, you have stolen my lesson. And I sort of stopped and thought, well, no, I haven't, because it's my lesson and I had the idea yesterday. But no, this person, this teacher, this colleague thought that I had stolen her lesson. And that's the sort of competitive and lonely side of teaching. Collaboratively working together, sharing lessons. So it isn't my lesson, it's our lesson. That support, that ability to support your colleagues, however, in terms of Larkin's poem, it needs you to know elsewhere. If you have no point of comparison to your own classroom, it's very difficult to offer good quality, supportive feedback. You need to have, like Larkin discovered, he needed to have an elsewhere. He understood his life in Coventry much better because he moved to Belfast where life was different and he was able to make comparisons. I suggest that you need to have knowledge of elsewhere, and elsewhere is not very far away. Elsewhere can be the classroom next door, your colleague's classroom. If we'd planned this better, I could have said to you all 500 of you, when did you last visit your colleague's classroom? Either physical or virtual. And I suspect that because we're all very busy, the number of people out of 500 who said, yes, I visited my colleague's classroom last week or last month wouldn't be very many. I think it's an incredibly important reference point. You're very often teaching the same syllabus, using the same materials. Hugely valuable to be able to see how other people do the same thing that you're trying to do. So what I would ask you to do is to promise me that at some point in the next 3 months, let's say, either physically, if you're able to, or virtually, if you're not able to, you visit a colleague's classroom and you think about what that experience means for your own teaching. By all means, offer feedback to your colleague, but in a sense, in that first visit, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that you learn and watch and observe how your colleagues do very similar things to you, but almost certainly slightly differently, possibly slightly less successfully, possibly slightly more successfully. So the message I'd like to say is that elsewhere is important. As Larkin expressed it, the importance of elsewhere. Please go elsewhere in order to understand your own classroom better. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to say hello to you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Roy-Cross. Thank you very much for your thought-provoking and reflective opening remarks. We appreciate it very much. And next, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you our distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Willy Adrian Renandya. I hope I got the name correct.
Almost.
Almost. Okay, so Dr. Willy Renandya is a principal lecturer at the Department of English Language and Literature at the National Institute of Education, Singapore. So may I now invite Dr. Willy Renandya to give the keynote speech.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'm really honored and also at the same time excited to be here with you on this very special evening. It's my first time to be giving a presentation to an audience, all of whom are mostly from Myanmar. I've had some opportunities talking or having a conversation with former students from Myanmar, but this is probably the first time that I'll be talking to such a large audience, and the majority of whom are English language teachers from Myanmar. I really like what you just shared with us, the importance of elsewhere. And in today's world or during the pandemic, elsewhere is just a click away, because with just one click, you can visit almost every other people's classroom. And that is what I've been doing actually for the past few months. I've been exchanging ideas with colleagues from different places in the world. I teach for them and they teach for me. People from New Zealand teaching my class. So so that I can observe them. And I also teach for them, for their students in New Zealand and also in Hong Kong. So in today's world, it becomes really, really much easier for you to compare notes, to look at what other people are doing, in terms of English language teaching in the classroom. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I will be talking about a very, very important topic: how we can help our students to develop their speaking proficiency. Yeah, to get us started, let me show you the 4 major skills that we deal with on a daily basis: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So these are 4 skills that we are concerned with, that we try to get our students to be able to develop proficiency in. Yeah. Let me ask you a quick question. May Win, are you still there? Which of these 4 skills is the most challenging for your students? Miss Moderator?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm talking. Yes.
Yes, good.
Yeah.
Which of these?
Yeah. In my experience, my students find writing the most difficult, because putting
writing
hands down. Yes. Okay. Black and white. Okay. So
okay.
They need to put it a lot more effort.
Yes, writing is the most difficult for your students, and also for you. Yes.
Yes. I'm lazy to write.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, writing is difficult for everyone, for you, for me, for your students, even for Roy also. Yeah, Roy, writing is difficult for everyone, for native speakers as well as non-native speakers of English. Which one, though, of the 4 skills is the most valued by language learners, or by the community, or by people from different parts of the world? Which one is the most valued? Yes, quick, 1, 2, 3, 4. Listening, speaking, reading, writing. Please say speaking.
Yes, speaking.
Yes, please say speaking, because the topic today is speaking. And really, students may be able to understand very well. They may be able to read. They may be able to listen and to write. But if they can't speak the language, people will say, he or she still are not able to use the language for communication. So speaking is very important. And today I'll be talking about speaking. And when you talk about speaking, you also have to talk about listening, because they come in pairs. Yeah, listening and speaking. If you listen well, chances are very high that you will also be able to develop your speaking skill. In the same way that reading and writing are also connected. If you read a lot, then your writing ability might also improve a great deal. But today, my focus will be on the teaching of listening and also speaking. So this is my plan for today. I will be talking about 2 things, basically. Very, very easy to remember. The first one, since my topic is about speaking, so we need to understand what speaking proficiency actually means to you and also to your students. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, once we understand what speaking proficiency is all about, and once we understand the process of developing proficiency in speaking, then we are in a better position to talk about approaches to teaching speaking, and also about methods of developing speaking proficiency. Yeah, so that's the plan for today. You don't need to take notes. I'll be sending you all my slides to May Win and the other committee members for you to use, for you to share with other teachers in your institutions. Okay, first off, what do we mean when we say that somebody has proficiency in speaking? When somebody is proficient in speaking, what do we mean by that? I'm going to share with you a very simple, a very easy definition. It's a 1-sentence definition here. There you go. So that's how I would define speaking proficiency. The key word here is ability. Yeah, ability to use language orally for a variety of communicative purposes. Yeah, remember that word. The key word is ability. Yeah. Now, what would be some example of that ability? Telling a story, for example, orally, that shows that you have the ability to express your ideas, to share your ideas with other people. Another example, to share good news or bad news, Sharing good news usually is easier, but sharing bad news requires some, some strategies and also some special skills, because you don't want to be abrupt. You don't want to upset people. You want to, do it in such a way that the person hearing the bad news is not too shocked to hear the bad news from you. Explaining a concept orally in the classroom, I think that is a very important skill for teachers. Yeah, your ability to explain difficult ideas about English language teaching, about grammar and things like that becomes very important. And that requires a high degree of speaking proficiency. The most difficult to me, at least, or to many other people, is this. When you try to manage a difficult conversation, that can be very, very difficult. When you have an issue with your boss, for example, when you have an issue with your spouses, for example, and how you negotiate, how you navigate that conversation can be really, really challenging, because you need not only linguistic resources, but you also need to make use of other non-verbal resources like, eye contact, facial expression, gestures. The tone of your voice becomes very important. But I think you have the idea. Speaking proficiency refers to the ability to use language orally for a variety of communicative purposes. You may also add for social purposes. You may also add for academic purposes in the school situations. Yeah, I think we understand that clearly. Next. What are some of the indicators? What are some of the criteria that we often use in order to be able to say that, well, that person is really, really proficient? May Win, for example, is really proficient. And she is probably one of the most proficient speakers in Myanmar, for example. So what are the indicators that you usually use to describe somebody's proficiency? I have 4 here for you to consider. I think you're familiar with this. The first one is accuracy. Accuracy usually refers to the ability to produce language correctly in terms of word choice, in terms of pronunciation, maybe, and also in terms of grammatical accuracy. So usually it refers to those areas of language skills. Accuracy, correct. Yeah, maybe small mistakes here and there, but by and large, the person is able to say things accurately. The second one, accuracy is not enough. I think fluency is also another important indicator, whether and to what extent you are able to express yourself smoothly, fluently, easily, effortlessly. So that is another important indicator whether somebody has a certain level of proficiency in the English language. Is that enough? The answer is no, that's not enough. Yeah. What distinguishes somebody who is at the lower end of the scale with somebody at the middle and the higher end is the ability of that person to use a wider range of language features, more complex grammatical structures, more sophisticated vocabulary, for example. So that distinguishes, lower ability and higher proficiency students. Is that enough, May? Is there anything else that I'm missing here? May Win? Am I missing anything here? Accuracy, fluency, complexity, is that enough?
Well,
yeah, something is missing, isn't it? Yes, something is missing. And that something is this, appropriacy. Whether or not what you say is relevant, whether or not what you say is socially acceptable and culturally acceptable. When you speak a language, you want to give the impression that you are a nice person, you are a kind person, you are not conceited and things like that. And you don't want to sound rude or impolite to other people. So appropriacy is another important dimension. Okay. So next. What are some of the standards that we often use to measure somebody's proficiency? Usually one of the most popular or some of the most popular includes IELTS and TOEFL. But if you teach high school students, if you teach students at the university level, these tests may not be the best measures because these are measures of students' academic language proficiency. I think what is becoming popular these days is another standard, very popular now, is called CEFR, Common European Framework of reference a growing number of countries in the region. For example, Vietnam and Thailand and Malaysia and Japan and also China are beginning to adopt this framework as a target, as a standard of proficiency, and for teaching purposes and also for assessment purposes. The standard looks like this, which I really like very much. So proficiency is indicated from at the lower end of the scale, A1, A2, to the higher end of the scale, C1, C2, or the middle ones, B1 and B2. As I said, this is increasingly used by a number of countries in the region. In fact, I work very closely with British Council Indonesia, trying to influence policy decisions within the Ministry of Education, suggesting that the country adopt CFR as a standard of proficiency among high school students and also university students. A quick question for you, May Win. Where are you on the scale? Are you a C1, C2 in terms of your proficiency?
Well,
or maybe C3?
No. I think I can be around C1 and C2. Okay. I am a bit more
yes.
Yes.
Yes, C1 and C2 is very good.
Yes.
I think for most purposes, C1 is more than sufficient. And for teaching purposes, I think C1 is an ideal target. In fact, Malaysia, for example, has decided that English language teachers need to have a level of proficiency at the C1 level. In other places, it's a B2. Like Vietnam, their target for teachers is to have a level of proficiency at the B2 level. Yeah. Okay. Now we have a clear idea about what proficiency is all about. Yeah. Ability to use language for communicative purposes, for social purposes, for academic purposes, and we have also seen very briefly the criteria, the indicators of proficiency. We have also seen some of the well-known standards that people use in order to indicate one's level of proficiency. We are now ready to talk about teaching approaches. Yeah. If that is what we understand as proficiency, then what should we do in terms of approaching, in terms of selecting the kind of approaches that are most appropriate for helping students develop that level of proficiency? Okay, if you look at the professional literature, there are many approaches out there. Yeah, but today I'm going to share with you only two approaches, because most of the other approaches can be parked under each one of these two approaches. The first approach is what I would call teaching language as knowledge. And the second approach is known or is often referred to as the approach to teaching language as ability. Are they the same? Are they different? The answer is they are different. Are they equally important? Yes? No? Maybe? We will see. Okay, we'll see. Yeah. After my presentation, then you'll be able to judge for yourself which one is more important for you to help your students develop that level of proficiency that you are aiming for. Okay. The first one is very easy to understand, actually, teaching language as knowledge. And this is something that many teachers are very familiar with. Basically, you are teaching language as knowledge. So knowledge about pronunciation, how to produce an affricate sound, for example, or how to produce a interdental fricative sound, for example, in English language. Yeah, vocabulary, knowledge about the vocabulary. Sometimes we expect our students to learn about 1,000, maybe 2,000 words in the English language, and grammar is another thing. Grammar is often taught as knowledge of the present tense, for example, knowledge about the past tense, knowledge about the past perfect tense, and things like that. And finally, also knowledge about the text structure. Okay, a narrative is usually written in this way: the beginning, the middle, and the end. The orientation, the setting, and then the conflicts, the you know, the climax of the story and the end of the story. Now, these are things that these things are very often taught as knowledge. And one approach that is very popular with teachers in many different places is called the PPP approach. The first P is where the teacher explains at length a specific target language structure or maybe a vocabulary item. You maybe you spend about 15 minutes explaining how to use the past perfect tense, for example. And then P2, you give students a lot of practice, usually worksheet exercises, multiple choice exercises, fill in the blank exercises, making sure that the students really understand. Again, we are targeting knowledge here. And finally, at P3, you give students, you know, some time to practice the target language structure that they have just presented. Okay, students, now do a role play and make sure that you use the past perfect tense in your role play. Wow, that's really difficult, isn't it? So this is the approach to teaching language as knowledge. Okay, now the question for us is this: is this knowledge useful? May, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, is this knowledge useful? Yes, no, maybe? Choose one.
For me, yes.
Yes, okay. Yes, I think nobody would disagree with you that the answer is yes. But my next question, think very carefully. My next question is, how useful is this? Does it contribute directly to students' development in speaking or in language proficiency? Please say, not sure.
But I think knowing the language, knowing about the language will
Yes.
help to be able to use the language better.
Yes. Okay. So that is your take on that. My take is this. Yes, knowledge is useful, but it is useful for only about 15, maybe, or 20%. The other 80%, no. Yeah. It's useful for the students to pass the test. It's useful for the students to pass the big examinations, which is primarily testing students' knowledge of the language. Now, let me just continue. The other approach is known as teaching language as ability. Now, this is a slightly different thing. In this way of teaching, language is always presented in context. When you see language in context, like in a story, in a novel, in a digital story and everything, the pronunciation is there. The grammar is there, always in context, and the vocabulary is always there in context as well. So this is just a quick example of what it means by teaching language as ability. Yeah, next. When you teach language as ability, you know, your main focus is to develop your students' implicit knowledge of the language, not explicit knowledge of the language. It is not entirely, it's not completely useful. It's not very useful for the students to be able to tell you the rules of the past tense. Yeah, it plays a small part, but only a small part. Because language learning happens when you have acquired a lot of implicit knowledge. Point number 2 actually is about explicit knowledge. Focus noticing of language features. So some attention, some explanation of important language features that occur in a text is useful. But the key word here is some, not much. Yeah? Okay. So here we have 2 approaches. The first one is teaching language as knowledge, and the other one is teaching language as ability. Which one do you think is more popular with teachers? Not just in Myanmar, but in many, many places in Asia, if not in the world. In Japan, you see the same thing happening. In Thailand, you see the same thing happening. In Vietnam, also the same thing happening. Which approach is more popular, do you think? The left-hand side or the right-hand side? Yes, say it together. Left, right?
Left.
Yes, left. The left-hand side is very popular. Now, the next question is this: which approach is more in line with theories of language learning? Please say the right-hand side, May. Yes, the right-hand side. Yes, because the next slide is going to explain why the right-hand side. Okay, here's what happens. Yeah. Now here is a book, an academic book on language acquisition. The title is Instructed Second Language Acquisition, published in 2015, and the new edition just came out 2020 by the same author, Sean Lowen. And this is what he says. I'm going to flash it now. A very important quote for us to remember. May, can you read this for me? The ability, slowly, please. The ability
to produce language relatively easily for communicative purposes draws heavily on implicit knowledge.
Yes, and that is not just a casual statement. This statement is based on years and years of observations, years and years of empirical research. Yeah, let me read this again for you very slowly. The ability, remember my definition of proficiency is about the ability, yeah? Not about the ability to pass a test, no. It's the ability to produce language easily. Easily means fluently for communication, yeah? If you want to do that, you need to have a lot of implicit knowledge. If your knowledge is explicit, you will not be able to produce the language fluently. You may be able to say, you may be able to express yourself in the English language, but your language may be, contain a lot of mistakes. Your language may not be very fluent. It may not contain a lot of complex language as well. So the key word here is implicit knowledge, yeah? Okay, the next question then again is this, May, how do you develop implicit knowledge? How? Can you do it in the classroom with a lot of explanations, with PPP in the classroom? Yes, no, the answer? Yes. The answer is no, May. You can't. Yes, you can't. You can a little bit, but if you want 80% of your students' language knowledge to be implicit, then you need to go beyond the language classroom. The language classroom can become the starting place, the starting point, the base, but the students will have to take it further and spend quite a bit of time on their own. Now, here is how you can develop your implicit knowledge. It's a book here for you to look at by Richard Day, and the title of the book is Extensive Reading. So extensive reading is one excellent way for students to develop that implicit knowledge of the language. And more recently, I've seen a lot of discussion in the literature, and people also are saying that extensive listening is also an excellent way for students to develop their implicit knowledge. So the key word here is implicit knowledge. I have a quote here from the book. I think we need to read this very carefully and very slowly as well. May, do you want to read this again for us?
Yes, I can.
Yes, slowly.
Good things happen to students who read and listen a great deal in the foreign language.
Yes.
Research studies show they become better and more confident readers. They write better, their listening and speaking abilities improve, and their vocabularies become richer.
Yes, I hope you can see the link here. At the beginning, I said about ability. Proficiency is about ability, yeah? In the middle part, I talk about approaches, and that approach is called teaching language as ability, yeah? And how do you develop that ability? Is through implicit. And how do you develop implicit knowledge? Is through extensive reading and extensive listening. Look here. Good things happen to students who read and listen a great deal. And the key word here is a great deal. And that is how you develop your implicit knowledge of the language. Okay? So what is this thing called extensive reading and extensive listening? Very simple, very easy definition. But for some reason, teachers find it difficult to appreciate, find it difficult to understand. Now here is my one sentence definition. Yeah, extensive reading and extensive listening refers to the reading and the listening of a large number of easy and interesting materials. So the keywords, 3 keywords. Number 1, large quantity. Number 2, easy. And number 3, interesting. If you have this in place, then over time, after 1 year, after 2 years, your students will develop a lot of implicit knowledge of the language. Now, this is a detailed explanation of what extensive reading and listening is all about. If you read and understand 90% of the contents, then you are doing extensive reading. If your understanding is only 50, 60%, no, you are torturing yourself basically, and you will not learn a lot from it. Number two, you understand 95% of the vocabulary and the grammar. The higher, the better. And finally, most importantly, you enjoy the content. If you enjoy, then you become more motivated. And if you become more motivated, you want to read more, you want to listen more, and so on and so forth. Are there any evidence, any proof that this extensive reading and listening actually works? Yes. Now, here's one example from Korea. This girl is Sodam, and this is what happens to her. She has read over 1,000 books, and she started reading when she was in grade 4, and by the time she was in grade 8, she became very, very proficient, and she speaks English really, really fluently and really, really very well. And when she took part in competitions, English speaking competitions, she almost always won first prize. Some other examples from the region. The girl on the left-hand side is from Thailand. She enjoys watching cartoons on TV, on DVDs, on the internet. The middle one is a boy from Vietnam. His English also is wonderful, as measured by IELTS is 7.5. His speaking ability in particular is excellent. And he enjoys reading a great deal. And the last one also from Vietnam, and that is a teacher. He's a teacher of English. Her IELTS was 8.5. And she told me that she enjoyed reading books during her free time. Okay. You may be thinking, yes, reading is good, listening is good, reading a lot is good, but how do we get all the materials? If materials nowadays are just a click away, what you need is internet access. And there's a lot of free resources out there. Now, here are some examples. Room to Read is one of them. You have thousands of resources there, free for you to see and download. Storyline Online is also a free resource. It's a wonderful collection of stories read aloud by celebrities, movie stars, politicians, political leaders, and many other important people in our field. And here is the last one, another one, ELLLO. Now this site has thousands of freely available video and listening materials, all free materials, yeah? So teachers, you just need to do a bit of search on the internet and you'll be able to find a lot of resources that will allow your students to read and listen with great enjoyment. Okay, the last part is this, teaching methods. So what sort of teaching methods should we be using? Let me show you an example of a listening lesson. Now here is a typical listening lesson that many teachers are familiar with. Usually there are 3 stages in your lesson: before, during, and after. Please look at this lesson structure and please say that this is very, very common. It happens in the classroom very often. May? Are you there, May? Please say yes, that this is something that is very common in the classroom, yeah?
Yes.
So there's some warm-up activities, some language explanation, some discussion about the content before the students are listening to the video or to the audio materials. And then the students listen for once, maybe twice, and afterwards test. Give students 10 questions. A lot of comprehension exercises. Very typical, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, my suggestion is this. I think in a listening lesson, you have to make sure that the students do a lot of listening. And that is where the listening, extensive listening comes in. And that is where the students are able to get a lot of implicit knowledge of the language. Now, this is my suggestion. Here, maybe the before one here, some warm up, some language explanation maybe, but the middle one is going to be different. The middle one is when the students are allowed to actually do the best that they can in order to help them really understand what the listening material is all about. They are allowed to slow down the speed, because speed has been shown to be one of the most difficult obstacles for the students for comprehending audio materials. If that is not enough, then allow the students to use the subtitles. The subtitles in Myanmar, or in Myanmar language, the subtitle in the original language, it doesn't matter. So the key thing here is that the students are listening again and again and again. Yeah, listen very carefully. Here at this stage, the students are doing a lot of listening with a lot of understanding. So the students are maybe listening 3 times, 4 times, or maybe 5 times. Okay, at the end, do not just use comprehension questions. If you can, don't use it. Use some other ways of measuring, of checking, of supporting comprehension. Here, find out about how they feel. Find out about what they think about the story that they have just listened to. Yeah. Tell them or allow them to do something with the materials. Maybe doing some mind mapping, maybe drawing some cartoons that reflect their understanding of the audio materials. Maybe ask them to act out, some of the things that happen in the listening materials. Yeah. If they can do some blogging or vlogging exercises, that's even better. Point number 2, do shadowing activity. Now, this is one of the most powerful strategies that polyglots or proficient language users use to develop their English language proficiency. Shadowing is doing, reading aloud or speaking along with or without the subtitles as you listen to the audio materials. And finally, find additional listening materials of similar or the same topics to the lesson, to your listening lesson. Yeah, the key thing to remember is that in a listening lesson, the students must do a lot of listening, because listening in and of itself is a great source of language development. So that is how you apply the idea behind extensive listening. Yeah. So what do you actually learn when you listen again and again and again? Now, here is an example. Now, here's an example from a very successful English language learners from China. They are winners of the National English Language Competition in China. And they said that they spend hours and hours doing English language practice. And what kind of practice? Is it worksheet exercises, fill in the blank, correcting the errors? No, it's not. It's this one. They're doing this. They're listening again and again and again until they become very good at understanding the audio materials. This is what they say. Yeah, let me read this to you. Well, at first I was very slow. I had to listen to it many more times. And gradually I developed some feel of the language. May Win, if you are still awake, can you translate the word feel here for me?
Well, translate it into the Myanmar language.
No, a word that I used earlier on in my presentation. What does feel here refer to?
Your understanding.
Nope.
Implicit knowledge.
Yes, exactly. Can you say that again, May? Say that again.
Implicit knowledge.
Exactly. That's what happens. Yeah. So students know what it means. They may not be using the word implicit, but they know that this refers to feel or intuition, basically. They develop this language intuition. And what is this language intuition? I feel that I just have countless means hundreds, thousands of patterns swimming in my head. And what are these patterns actually? These patterns are sentences. These patterns are expressions from movies that they have watched. And these expressions often just pop out just like that. So these expressions, vocabulary, grammar, or both? The answer is both.
Both.
Yeah, vocabulary and grammar merge together into expressions which researchers the scholarly discussions referred to as lexical chunking, lexical bundles. So the words and the grammar come together lively like this. So when you do a lot of listening, you'll be able to remember things like make do with it, make it up to you, make fun of me all along. But these things are always in context, remember? Always, always in context, not in isolation. Made my day. The greetings, the Christmas greeting, for example, just made my day. Please make up your mind. And there are many other instances. Here are some other instances. Well, this one is on me. It was lovely to see you. Thanks for coming. I don't believe a word of it. Now, these words, phrases, they come together just like that. And what is important is that competent speakers, so people like Roy, people like me, like May Win, and many other people in the audience, they have hundreds and thousands of these lexical chunks. And these are ready-made expressions that you can deploy, that you can use when you need them to, to engage in a conversation with other people. Okay? Okay, now moving on now. What about an example of speaking lesson? Now here is an example. May please look at this again. Again, 3 phases, 3 stages, the before, the during, and the after. Is this fairly typical that you have seen before in your classroom observation? Please say yes. May?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, this is very typical, yeah? A topic is given, and then some teacher-led brainstorming activities, and then the students do some pair work, and then finally class presentation, yeah? Something like that. My suggestion is to tweak this lesson a little bit so that we can add elements of extensive listening and extensive reading into our lesson. Now, this is what it looks like. The before. It's not enough just to introduce a topic. It is not enough just for you to, do some brainstorming activities. It's not enough. I think the first thing you need to do is to provide a lot of audio text or video text to your students. And the audio and video text should be related to the topic that the students are expected to talk about, to present later on, about health. So find 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 similar, model texts, if you like. And ideally, you, the teacher, should also give a model for the students to look at. And then spend some time noticing the language features. This is when you can explain to the students, hey, when you give a presentation, I think you may want to use this organization. You may want to use certain structures. Like, well, in my presentation today, I have 3 things that I want to share with you. Point number 1 is about this. Point number 2. So these are things that you can explain to your students. The middle one, the same. Give students practice. Pair work, group work, yeah? The last one, I'm suggesting please stay away as much as possible from asking students to present in front of the class. Do it only once in a while, not too often. The reason is that if one student is presenting, the rest of the students in the classroom, they're not doing anything. They're not even listening to their friend's presentation. Yeah. So my suggestion is for you to get the students to do more group activities, giving them opportunities to redo, to do again, to present again, but with different groups of students. This is how they can develop their fluency and their accuracy also. You may also want to explore the use of some applications, tech tools for students to do further practice. Now, here are some examples of different kind of work, group work arrangement. So students can rotate in different groups and do the same presentation several times. I know it may sound like a bit boring because the students are doing the same thing again and again, but trust me, that is the only way students can develop fluency, ease, and ability to express themselves quickly and easily. Now, finally, if you can, use some technological tool, some application that is available out there for free, and one of which is called Flipgrid. Please write it down. If you haven't used it, please use it. It's an excellent tool for your students to practice speaking, to practice presenting, to practice their oral language. It's a video sharing tool that your students will enjoy working on. So first, the students can have their presentation recorded and then give them a checklist so that they can check their own presentation. And then if they're happy, then that's it. If they're not happy, they should not be happy, because the first presentation, the first draft is usually not very good. Yep. And because of that, they need to do the recording one more time. Look at this. The students are doing the same thing again and again. And hopefully the second time around, they'll be able to do a better job compared to the first one. Yeah. Once that is done, don't stop there. The next bit is for them to send their recording to their friends. And Flipgrid allows you to share your recording to the public or to a small group of your friends or your students. Now, this is very important because this is where the students will get feedback from their friends. And when the feedback is, no, your presentation is not good, then they have to do it again, until they are very good, until they get all thumbs up from their friends. Then they're happy. And the last stage is for them to share their recording to the whole world, maybe via Twitter, maybe via YouTube, and things like that. Ladies and gentlemen, I've now come to the end of my presentation. So 3 points, or 2 points actually, that I've presented to you today. Number one, I've shared with you a very simple, very easy definition of what speaking proficiency is all about. The indicators that we usually use to find out whether or not a student is proficient, and also the typical standard of proficiency. I've also shared with you 2 major approaches to language teaching. One is teaching language as knowledge, and the other one is teaching language as ability. And I am suggesting that we should pay more attention to the second one, teaching language as ability. Because if that is your focus, then what you need to do is to help your students develop their implicit knowledge of the language using approaches such as extensive listening and extensive reading. And I've given you a couple of examples of how you can tweak your lesson so that your lesson becomes richer, so that your lesson allows your students to develop their implicit knowledge before they perform the task, whether it is listening task or speaking task. And finally, since you have been listening very attentively, here is a special gift for you. Now, these 2 books are free for you to download. All you need to do is you need to go to my website. It's called Renandya.com. These 2 books and many, many others are free for you to view and also free for you to download. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. I hope you find my presentation useful.
Thank you very much for a very stimulating keynote speech, Dr. Willy Renandya. And I also noted that there were several questions raised, but since this is a keynote speech section, there is no Q&A session, I'm afraid. Okay. I apologize for that. And we have actually run over time. So,
I know, yes.
Yeah, but that was worth it, yeah.
Let me see, yes. Over by about 10 minutes.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining today's opening session. And as you leave the Zoom meeting, may I remind you that you log into the next Zoom meeting correctly. And also don't forget to